Hi, I'm Lauren from Lauren Nicole Photography, and today I am testing out some new software to see if it will capture my screen appropriately so that hopefully I can bring you more tutorials in future. So I thought I would just show some basic post-production techniques on an old photo of mine and give a little bit of an overview on Photoshop for people who don't know much about it. So I'll start with this image, which was taken at Rye Back Beach, which is of Dragon Head Rock. Be very careful if you're going to this location. The tides are paramount. It is absolutely paramount that you check the tides before venturing down there. The water comes in fast and it is quite ferocious. There have been people who have been knocked off of rocks, cameras lost, people lost, and recently in the past 12 months I think a fisherman unfortunately lost their life down there. So please be careful, do your research, scout the area. Walking out to this particular spot, there is a lot of hidden rock pools. You think that you're going to put your foot on some seaweed, but the seaweed's actually covering a hidden rock pool, and you can break your ankle, or even worse, lose your camera. So please be careful, go slow, take people with you, and take obvious safety precautions. Anyway, with that little disclaimer out of the way, we'll start with some very basic Photoshop techniques. So because this is a raw file, it will automatically open in the camera raw filter. If you've taken your pictures in JPEG and you'd like to get to this screen, you just need to go up to the filter section here and click raw camera filter, and this window will pop up. So very easy. I like starting in here. It's a really quick and easy way to access a lot of different settings. And the sliders make it really easy for you to see where your image is going and how you'd like to edit them. So in here, as you can see, it was a pretty grey overcast day, which made, it was good for a long exposure photo, but not particularly good for an interesting sky. So we'll see what we can do with that today. Right, so you've got your exposure here. If you find that your photo is too dark or too light, you can move this around. You can make it a little bit darker if you like, or you can brighten it up if your image is too dark. Contrast makes your photo a little bit more grungy, brings out some details, but it does make it a little bit grainy. So I typically don't go too crazy with the contrast, but I do like to add a little bit, especially when you've got interesting rock formations and such that you'd like to pop a little bit. So for this, we've got our nice blown out sky. Highlights is your best friend in this instance. So if we reduce down the highlights, you can see a lot of that detail is coming back into the cloud. Still pretty bright though, we can fix that, don't stress. So here we have shadows. If you want to add more shadow to your image, you can, or if you want to get rid of some shadows, such as you've taken a photo of someone and part of their face is quite dark, this will help a little bit in getting rid of the shadows, and it also helps more of the details come through. So it depends on what kind of look you're going for, so just play around with it until you're happy with it. I mean, that's pretty good. We've got details there. Your whites, you can bring them down or brighten your image. In this one, we probably want to bring them down. So it can make your pictures a little bit dull, taking all the whites down. So you might need to add some brightness later on, which is in your settings over here once you've opened your image. Okay, so obviously you got your blacks, you can add a bit more, you can remove them. I tend to try, if it's a landscape, I find sometimes adding a little bit of black can help bring out a bit of the lines and the details, give everything a bit of an outline per se. Which is quite good. Sometimes you don't want blacks quite so much when you've got people in them. It really just depends on each particular image. So play around with the sliders and see what your personal preference is. Clarity, I don't go too overboard with clarity here because I like to use high pass filter instead. And I find clarity will make your photo quite grainy if you overdo it. So it's quite good for bringing out the details or really softening an image. You can take down the clarity slightly for a portrait. I don't, but that's just everyone's personal preference. So I tend to only really raise it to about 10-ish, depending on the image. I don't go too crazy with clarity because again I do other things later on. Dehaze is quite good for these types of skies when you want to bring out the clouds. Can help bring a bit of colour back into your sky if it's a bit blown out. See over here, I think it kind of looks like it's a little bit of sky, but it's so grey that don't really know. Dehaze can help bring a little bit of blue in and bring out some of your clouds for a bit more of a defined image, which you're about to see. So you can go, you know, really dramatic if you'd like. As you can see my lens, now that I've put that up, I got some sea spray, which is the nature of the back beach. So, you know, and then of course it'll darken your image and change, so you might want to go back and change these other settings now that you've put this through. So I don't want it too crazy, I just want a little bit of definition in that cloud for this. So as you can see, we might want to raise our shadows up a bit more, bring back a bit more of the colour into that. Don't worry, this has gone quite yellow, we'll fix that in another section. So there we are. Alright, now we've got vibrance and saturation. I've been asked what's the difference between the two. Well, my general understanding just from what I've seen, I don't know if this is actually the difference or not, is that vibrance tends to fill in the colour, whereas saturation tends to increase whatever colour is already there. So, and vibrance will also increase the colour as well. So as you can see, if we put that in to 100, the colours will fill in a little bit more. It's easier to see that when you've got more of a sky showing, but I'll pop that back down. And then you've got your saturation, which just increases the colours that are already there rather than spreading the colour per se. So that's saturation, vibrance. So I tend to like vibrance a little bit more than saturation, just because it does fill it in rather than just oversaturate your image and make it a bit Samsung photo filtery. No offense to any phone users out there. So you know, it fills in those colours a bit more. Alternatively, you can reduce colours as well if you'd like to go for that look. Or if there's only a particular colour that you want to increase, then we can do that in a different screen. So we'll just leave that at that for now. So up on here you've got your different charts. Some people really like these. I don't. Not a big chart person, never was, never will be. So I don't tend to use these particularly in what I'm doing. A lot of people do, a lot of people sing their praises, they're good to learn. Not currently on my priority list. So here we have some sharpening. I don't tend to do my sharpening here. I use a high pass filter, which I'll show you when I have finished in here. Luminance is good if you've got a really noisy, grainy image. It can only do so much. It'll make everything a bit blurry. But it is good, especially if you take Milky Way images. I tend to use luminance there to increase it a little bit, just so it gets rid of that graininess and makes the stars look a little bit rounder. So it's nice to add a little bit. So a bit hard to see though, let's see. Not the best of images to show you. As you can see, there's a fair bit of detail there. And then increasing just blurs down those details a bit more. But for this image, we don't really need to use that. So this is where we can change our individual colours. So as I said, this has come up really yellow. You can change the hue. So if you don't want it quite so yellow, you can make it a bit greener, a bit redder, or orange. Or alternatively, you can just reduce the saturation of those particular colours, so it's not quite so blinding and looks a bit more like a rock again. So there we go, that's pretty good. If you'd like this to come up a bit more, you really like your greens, you really want them to show, you can just play around with these. If you decide, you know what, I really wish that the water was a lot bluer that day, you can change that in here as well. Make it a bit more aqua or a bit more green. So entirely up to you and your preferences and what you'd like to do. Just be careful when you're messing with your yellows. It will also impact on your foliage and your greens as well. So you might go, you know what, that sand's really too yellow, I don't like that sand. You try and take it down, and then all of your greenery loses its colour as well. So just watch out for that. You can bring that back in with a sponge tool just on that section. It's entirely up to you what you'd like to do. This will just affect the whole of your image at this point. So you can also make it a bit darker or a bit brighter if you want to blur it in, or make it very, very standout-ish. I'm sure that's a word. So I mean, you know, you've got a bit of a start to your image here. You can do split toning, lens correction. This is good, especially if you've got extremely wide angle lenses and there's a bit of distortion, can help. Or alternatively, removing chromatic aberration from skies and whatnot, and you'll also be able to manually adjust the distortion and vignetting down there as well. You can add grain, you can add a post vignette if you really want one for some reason. That's all in here, which again is another reason why this is a very powerful and easy to use tool. You've got your presets, you can save things in here so you don't have to keep doing the same thing over and over if you've got batches of images, etc. So we're pretty happy with where we've gone. You can also see this one, before and afters. So that's what we started with, and just by using this set of things here, this is what we've ended up with. So yeah, that's a fairly reasonable starting point. So then we can open our image and hope that it doesn't crash. There we go. Alright, so here we are. We've got this. Now if that sky is still too bright for you and you want to burn it down, there is a burn tool, and you can change whether you want the highlight, just the highlights burnt down, the midtones, or the shadows. You can change how strong you want it. I would recommend starting quite low because it is a fairly powerful tool. And you can always go back and change it and try again and see what best suits your needs. Over here you've got your panel that you can change things around. You can change your brightness. This is the additional exposure settings, gamma correction, gamma, not grammar, my gosh, need more coffee today. So, you know, that kind of darkens it down a little bit as well. Happens quite, it is fairly strong, so you probably don't want to go too full on with this. So, vibrance, if you're not happy with that. Exposure. And it's also got a black and white tool in here. Black and white, so you can, and that's really good for different types of black and white. So if you want to mostly affect the greens, the reds, that sort of thing, it will give you lots of different options to suit different images. So really, really good. As you can see here and up here, I got splashed courtesy of the ocean, who would have thought. So if you want to get rid of things like that, fairly simple. A couple of different ways you can do it. Up here we have the spot removal healing brush. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Make sure you select your background or it won't work. Oop, there we go, that's working pretty well. And sometimes it doesn't really know what it's doing and it will randomly pick something very, very wrong. So you can also clone. So you can select part of the image by clicking Alt, click, and then moving over here, and it will pop that cloud, that bit of cloud that you selected, over to here. Oh yeah, if you want to crop, you can crop. You want to get in close, want to twist it around, you can twist it around. It's up to you. I don't tend to use the sharpen tool very often. Here we can burn down our sky. Your brush size is here, so you can pick the softness, how hard you want it to be, the size of it. Make it big, make it little. You can make it really hard, which means it will stick very closely, or it will be or a very feathered brush, depending on how hard you want it to be. So very slowly bring it across our sky, and it's bringing in a bit more of that detail and taking some of that brightness out of the clouds there. Go away. So that's pretty good. Now this high pass filter I keep mentioning, you go to filters. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Flatten your image so that it incorporates those changes that you've made. Convert to smart object so that you can change the high pass filter into an overlay. You'll see why in a minute. Filter, other, high pass. High pass filter will sharpen only the edges of your image for a radius of however many pixels. So instead of sharpening the entire image and getting that quite pixelated, grainy look, it will only sharpen the outline sections. So this is really good for feathers, really good for fur. So, and depending, you know, you can, I would never recommend going that high, but just to show you what it can do. So that sharpens everything and it's quite grainy. So we probably, I tend to keep it under 4. So we'll just leave it at that. As you can see, it's selected my rock, but it hasn't affected the sky, so the clouds aren't going to look grainy. And we click OK. Alright, so this is why we want to make it a smart filter, so that we get this little box down here, which gives us the option to turn it into an overlay. And there's our image back, but it has sharpened all the edges and brought out those details. So you can do a few different ones here. You can do soft light, which will be a bit more of a softer sharpen, or a hard light. It's very difficult to see on this image. You've really got to look close for a much harder. That's soft. You can see a lot of that detail suddenly vanish. And hard, a lot of that detail comes back in, especially to this seaweed down here. So we'll go, okay, we want to go hard. You know, it's nice earthy rock. We've got some good greenery happening in that corner there, just for a bit of something in the foreground. And when you're finished with it, you can flatten it down, and there's our edited image, which if I go back, just opening photos, that's what we started with, and that's what we finished with. So that's some very basic Photoshop editing for you. I hope you've enjoyed this short video, and hopefully I will be able to bring you more in the future. Thank you for listening. Bye.